Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. The station sat at the end of a dirt road nobody used anymore. The main room had a steel door, a working hand pump, and cabinets filled with outdated gear. I ripped out broken shelves and used them to barricade the windows, leaving small shooting gaps in case anything reached the porch. The garage bay had tools rusting on hooks and a generator without fuel. I repaired the hinges, rewired the light switches to isolate the building's circuits, and turned the attic crawlspace into an observation point. The forest never stayed quiet. Infected strayed into the area at night, drawn by wind snapping loose metal or animals knocking things over. I patrolled the perimeter every morning, clearing fallen branches, tightening tripwires, and resetting bear traps I pulled from nearby hunting cabins. The biggest threat came from people, not the infected. Twice in the first month, armed scavengers approached the station after spotting smoke from my fire pit. Reinforcing the station gave me enough warning to stay hidden and avoid direct confrontation, but it also made it clear I couldn't afford mistakes. My name is Daniel Cole. Before the outbreak, I worked for the State Forestry Department in Washington. My area included sections of Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. I knew the roads, the trailheads, the little green rectangles on the map that marked improvements, which usually meant a bathroom, a gravel parking area, or some forgotten maintenance building. When the infection spread through the cities and highways turned into dead zones, I packed my truck at dawn, left my small rental house in Vancouver, and drove east along State Route 14 until the traffic thinned and the radio turned into static. I did not have some detailed plan when I left. I just knew I needed to get out of the city and off the main interstates where stalled cars blocked every lane. I stayed on back roads that paralleled the Columbia River, watched smoke rise from across the water in Oregon, and turned north on smaller highways. I passed through Stevenson and Carson, kept going until my fuel gauge started to dip below a quarter tank, then cut onto forest service roads that still had standing trees instead of burning ones. The ranger station I found was one of those places most people never see. It sat on a spur road off a gravel route that once served a small fire detection network and a couple of trailheads. The sign at the turnoff was half-rotten and leaning. Moss covered the lettering. The main building was a single-story concrete blockhouse with a pitched metal roof and a small radio tower beside it. There was a separate garage with a roll-up door and a steel fuel tank on a stand out back that had been emptied long before I arrived. I checked the place like it was a crime scene. I parked my truck 50 yards away behind a cluster of fir trees with branches low enough to break up the outline. I walked in with my 12-gauge shotgun at low ready, using a simple pump-action Remington I had bought years earlier for hunting but mostly used on clay targets. Inside, the air smelled of dust and dry paper. Mouse droppings covered the floor near the cabinets. There were no bodies, no dried stains on the walls, no broken furniture, just neglect. The steel front door closed evenly into its frame and had a manual deadbolt. The windows were single-pane glass and aluminum frames. They worried me most. The cabinets held outdated maps, blank incident forms, a couple of handheld radios with dead batteries, and a first aid kit with bandages that were still sealed. In the corner, there was a metal locker marked PPE. Inside, I found hard hats, gloves, a few safety goggles, and a set of old forest fire respirators that I guessed were beyond their service life, but still better than nothing. I decided on the spot that I would stay there, at least long enough to turn it into a place that could actually be defended. The first day, I dragged broken chairs and shelves into the main room, measured the window openings with a tape measure I found in a drawer, and made a list of materials I needed. The garage had a bench vise, a manual drill, boxes of rusty screws, wrenches, and a battered chainsaw that still had bar oil in the reservoir. No fuel, though, and no spare chain. I used my truck to run short loops around the station on the first afternoon, checking side roads for cabins, maintenance sheds, or anything with boards and hardware I could salvage. Within 3 miles, I found a closed campground with a bathhouse containing stall doors made from thick plywood. I pulled the doors off their hinges and slid them into the truck bed. At an old trailhead kiosk, I unbolted information boards that were already half torn by weather. Back at the station, I cut them to size with a handsaw and screwed them over the windows, leaving narrow horizontal gaps near the top that lined up with my eye level when I was standing. The generator in the garage was a mid-sized portable unit on a wheeled frame, the kind you might see at a construction site. The fuel tank was bone dry, and the spark plug was corroded. I cleaned it with fine sandpaper, checked the oil, and used starting fluid I found on a shelf to test fire it once I brought in fresh gasoline. I decided not to run it unless I absolutely had to. Sound traveled too far in the forest. For light at night, I relied on a headlamp, candles, and a small battery-powered lantern I recharged from the truck's battery with an inverter. An attic crawl space ran along the length of the building beneath the roof. The access hatch was in a closet. I pulled myself up with a flashlight, crawled on the joist between insulation, and found a spot at the front where I could cut a low observation slit out of sight from the ground. With a short hacksaw and patience, I made a narrow opening just under the roofline, barely wider than my hand. From there I could see the dirt road, the little parking area, and the first 50 yards of the tree line. The first infected I saw near the station arrived 3 nights after I moved in. I heard the footsteps on gravel before I saw anything. I was lying on my camping pad in one corner of the main room, shotgun within reach, when a single slow scrape came from outside. I killed the lantern, moved in the dark to the attic hatch, and eased myself up with my heart pounding loud enough I was sure it would give me away. Through the slit, I saw a shape wandering into the open area near the radio tower. Even in the moonlight, I could tell something was wrong with the way it moved. The steps were uneven, with a dragging pattern. The clothes were torn and dirty. The head snapped in short, erratic motions as if listening to sounds I could not hear. I stayed completely still. The infected person drifted around the yard, sniffed near my parked truck, then wandered off down the road again. It took 20 minutes. I did not sleep at all the rest of the night. The next morning, I started laying out a perimeter. About 30 yards from the building, I ran thin paracord between trees at knee height, tying it to old tent stakes and scrap metal pieces I found in the garage. On each line, I hung bits of aluminum from broken window frames and can lids punched with holes, so anything that walked into them would jangle the metal. On the trails that led in from the east and west, I set up the bear traps I collected from 2 nearby hunting cabins. I was careful to mark their locations in my notebook and on a sketch map so I would not forget and step on one. My weapons were basic but reliable. The shotgun stayed by the front door, loaded with a mix of birdshot and buckshot I had in separate boxes, because my goal was not to clear crowds but to stop anything that reached the steps. On my hip, I carried a 9mm pistol, a simple compact model I had trained with at a local range. I kept spare magazines in a small chest rig formed from a modified tool belt so I could put it on in seconds. Ammunition was limited, so I promised myself I would not fire unless I had no other choice. Within the first week, I learned that sound was my biggest enemy. The hand pump in the corner of the main room worked, but it had a loud squeak in the handle that echoed at night. I took it apart, cleaned to the pivot points, and greased them with automotive grease from the garage until it moved smoothly and quietly. I also changed when and how I cooked. Instead of making noise on a metal camp stove in the open, I moved it into the garage, cracked the door just enough for ventilation, and used a small fan powered by a 12-volt battery to push fumes out. The first time other survivors showed up, I almost made a deadly mistake. It was late afternoon on a cloudy day. I was outside, tightening one of the paracord lines that had sagged, when a truck engine grumbled in the distance. I froze, listened, and heard it growing louder, gravel popping under tires. I barely made it back inside and slid the steel door shut before a pickup came around the last bend in the road. Through a narrow gap in one boarded window, I saw 3 people in the truck bed, all armed. One had a hunting rifle slung across his chest. Another held a baseball bat with nails hammered through one end. The driver wore a camouflage jacket and had a pistol holster on his hip. They rolled to a stop in front of the building and climbed out, talking in voices just loud enough for me to catch bits. "Bet there's fuel here," one of them said. "Station like this? Maybe radios, batteries? Check the tank out back," another replied. They walked straight for the fuel tank stand, tapped on the sides and swore when it rang hollow. One circled the building and tried the steel door. When it did not budge, he banged on it with the side of his fist. "Anyone in there?" he called. "We're just looking for supplies." I kept my back against the wall, pistol in my hand, safety off, breathing slow. My fingers stayed off the trigger, but I felt every pound of pressure it would take. The man waited a few seconds, then laughed and turned away. "Place is dead," he said. "Windows are boarded. Nobody's used the road in weeks. We can pry it later if we have time." They rummaged through the garage, took a box of wrenches I had left on the bench, and walked the grounds for another few minutes. One of them tripped a paracord line and swore at the metal clinking around his legs. Then they got back in the truck and left the way they had come. I did not move from that spot next to the steel door until I could no longer hear the engine. After that, I changed my smoke discipline. I stopped using the fire pit out front and instead dug a trench in the trees behind the station, building a small rocket stove-style pit using cinder blocks and stones to channel the heat and reduce visible smoke. I cooked only during daylight and avoided fatty foods that produced thick, dark plumes. The station needed to look abandoned to anyone who passed, even from a distance. About 3 weeks into my stay, the battery-powered radio I kept on the desk finally picked up a consistent signal. It was a repeating broadcast from what sounded like a state emergency operations center. The message was generic. "Avoid large population centers. Do not approach quarantine zones. Do not attempt to travel on major highways. Report to designated safe areas only if you were within walking distance." The safe areas listed were all far from my location, or already overrun, based on what I had heard earlier when I still checked the news. The broadcast confirmed what I had already concluded. Nobody was coming to clear this area soon. There would be no organized recovery within weeks, maybe months. The ranger station was not just a temporary shelter. It was my home base for the foreseeable future. I started expanding my reach in a careful pattern. I created a mental clock and spoke it aloud sometimes to keep myself organized. I would move out at sunrise, walk one direction along the forest road or through the trees for about an hour, check any structures or vehicles I found, and aim to be back by late morning. In the afternoon, I would work on fortifications, water storage, and inventory. At night, I would sit in the attic crawlspace for the first 2 hours after sunset and listen to the forest. On one of those morning patrols, I found my first ally. It was a clear day with thin clouds, air cool enough that my breath showed when I exhaled. I was half a mile east of the station, moving along the tree line parallel to the road when I heard coughing. It was not the rasping, irregular sound I had heard from infected. It was a dry, controlled series of coughs followed by a curse. I dropped into a crouch behind a fallen log, brought my binoculars up, and scanned the road ahead. A few seconds later, I spotted movement. A woman in a dark green jacket was leaning against a guardrail post, one hand pressed to her side. She had short brown hair pulled back in a small tie and wore a radio harness like the ones used by fire crews. A rifle hung on a sling from her shoulder, barrel pointed down. Her face was pale, and there was a dark stain on the side of her shirt that made my stomach tighten, but it did not look fresh. I watched for a full minute, checking for signs of infection. No twitching, no sudden head-snapping motions, no unnatural gait. Just a tired person in trouble. Finally, I made a choice. "Do not move," I called from the cover of the trees. "I see your weapon. Keep your hands away from it." She flinched, turned her head, and squinted into the trees. "Human?" she asked. "You sound human." "For now," I said. "Hands where I can see them." She slowly raised both hands, fingers spread. The rifle shifted on its sling but stayed pointed at the ground. "I'm Riley," she said. "I'm with the district fire crew, or I was, before everything broke. I have a stitched cut on my side from a fall, not a bite. I can show you the bandage if that matters." "It matters," I said. "Any fever? Any strange behavior?" She gave a short, dry laugh that turned into another cough. "Strange behavior is normal now," she said. "But no fever. I would have been gone days ago. I've been walking for 2 days trying to reach the old station out here. They told us in briefing it still had a working well." I stayed behind the log another 30 seconds, weighing the risk. Then I stood up slowly, keeping my pistol in a low but ready position. "Keep your hands up," I said. "Walk toward my voice, 1 step at a time." She obeyed, moving slowly down off the road, shoulder and into the trees. When she was close enough, I stepped out so she could see me clearly. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of the pistol, but she did not reach for her rifle. "You alone?" I asked. She nodded. "Yeah," she said. "Our engine crew tried to break through on Highway 12. It did not go well. I cut through the forest when the road jammed. I lost track of everyone in the chaos." I watched her pupils, her breathing, the way she held herself. Everything looked normal except for exhaustion. "Turn around," I said, slowly. She turned. I moved close enough to check the bandage on her side by lifting the edge of her jacket. The wound was a clean slice with stitches, starting to bruise at the edges but not red or inflamed. No bite marks on her arms or neck. I stepped back. "Come with me," I said. "But understand this, if you start to change, if you show any sign of infection, I will not hesitate." "Fair," she said. "I would expect the same from you." Bringing another person into the station changed everything. We now had 2 sets of eyes, 2 sets of hands, and 2 sets of needs. Riley knew the area almost as well as I did, but from a different angle. She had maps in her head of fuel breaks, fire access tracks, and lookout sites. She also had training in medical response from working on wildland crews. We spent the first afternoon going over the station's layout, the perimeter, and the rules I had set for myself. We agreed that the steel doors stayed locked at all times unless one of us was physically at the threshold. We created a simple challenge and response phrase for returning after patrols, just in case someone tried to mimic a voice. We set up a sleeping rotation, with one of us in the attic crawlspace for the first half of the night while the others slept, then switching. Riley contributed more than knowledge. Her pack contained a small trauma kit with better supplies than the old first aid box in the cabinet. She also had a compact handheld radio and spare batteries, pre-programmed with frequencies used by local emergency services. Most channels were silent, but once a day we listened for traffic. Once or twice we heard bursts of garbled voice, usually too faint to make out. The infected presence around the station increased as weeks passed. Sometimes a single figure would wander into the yard and stand there, turning slowly as if smelling for something hidden in the building. Other times, a small group would drift down the dirt road, bumping into each other, their heads moving in sharp jerks. Our tripwires and hanging metal warned us early enough that we could choose whether to engage or stay silent. We learned quickly that firing a gun near the station was a last resort. On the one occasion we did, it confirmed our fear. A lone infected stumbled into the yard late one morning while Riley was outside moving a stack of boards. It spotted her and broke into an awkward run. She shouted and backed toward the door but tripped over a cinder block. I was at the doorway with the shotgun already in hand. I waited until the infected was 10 yards away, then fired a single round of buckshot. The blast was deafening in the still air. The infected went down, its momentum carrying it forward a few more feet. For a full minute after, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, faint in the distance, we heard other cries answering. Not words, not language. Just a harsh, irregular sound that carried. "Get inside," I said. For the rest of the day, we stayed quiet and watched from the attic. 2 more infected wandered into view before evening, moving in clumsy loops around the spot where the first had fallen. They seemed confused by the scent and disturbance but did not find a way in. It was a hard lesson. After that, we prioritized traps and silent weapons. We cleaned a couple of old fiberglass bows from a storage closet, restrung them, and practiced with arrows we recovered from a closed sporting goods store in a small town 20 miles away. Our third resident arrived in the middle of a storm. It was a cold rain, coming down in steady sheets that turned the dirt road into mud. The radio tower vibrated with the wind, making a low hum in the background. I was in the garage, checking fuel levels in 2 red cans we kept for the generator and truck, when Riley called from the attic hatch. "Vehicle," she said. "Something small, coming fast." I stepped into the main room, grabbed my pistol and climbed up beside her. Through the observation slit, I saw a small SUV slide into the yard, tires throwing muddy water. The driver jammed it into park and stumbled out. A man in his 30s, wearing a soaked hoodie and jeans, holding something bundled in his arms. He waved toward the station with a frantic motion. "Please," he shouted. "I have a child. She's hurt. Please." Even through the rain and at a distance, I felt tension in every muscle. We watched for the telltale stumbles, the jerky head movements. There were none. The man slipped in the mud once, caught himself, and kept moving. The bundle in his arms shifted, and a weak voice cried out. "Help," the child said. "Dad." Riley looked at me. I read the same dilemma in her expression that I felt inside. Every rule we had built pushed us toward caution. Every part of our remaining conscience pushed us toward opening the door. "I'll cover you from the attic," she said. "You let them in, but check for bites first. We can keep them in the garage if we have to quarantine them." I took a deep breath, nodded once, and climbed down. I unlocked the steel door and opened it just enough for my body, pistol in hand, and pointed at the ground outside. "Stop right there," I called. "Set her down on the porch. Step back with your hands up." The man froze, then did exactly what I said. He laid the bundle, his daughter, gently on the wooden planks and stepped back, raising his hands. Up close, I could see the lines of fatigue on his face. He had a few days of stubble and dark circles under his eyes. The girl looked about 8 years old, wearing a too large jacket buttoned to her neck. Her left leg was splinted with a piece of wood and wrapped in duct tape. "Any bites?" I asked. "No," he said quickly. "She fell. We tried to get away from the highway, and she twisted her leg. It got worse. I don't know if it's broken, but she can't walk. We saw your tower, we saw the road. It's the only thing that looks safe in miles." I crouched near the girl, but kept my eyes on the man. "What's your name?" I asked her. "Emma," she said, voice shaky. "My leg hurts." "I see that," I said. "We're going to check you for cuts, okay? We need to make sure you're not sick with the same thing making the other people act strange." She nodded, teeth clenched. With Riley watching from above and the man standing 10 feet back with his hands still up, I checked Emma's arms, neck, and scalp. No bites, no abnormal marks. Her leg was swollen around the splint, but the skin was intact, just bruised. I stepped back. "Bring her inside," I said. "Slowly. You first, then her." The man's shoulders sagged with relief. He picked her up and moved past me into the main room. I closed and locked the door behind them. His name was Jason. He had been driving west from Yakima when the main roads clogged. He took side routes, tried to cut down onto Highway 12, and ended up crossing into the same forest district we were in now. When their car hit a tree branch hidden in a flooded dip, it knocked them into the ditch. Emma's leg slammed against the dashboard. They abandoned the vehicle a day later when a group of infected wandered too close. Having a child in the station changed our daily rhythm even more than Riley's arrival had. We shifted our patrol times, limited how far we went on scavenging runs, and spent more time making the interior of the building livable instead of just defendable. We brought in 2 more cots from an empty fire cache building we found to the north. We rewired one of the light circuits so a single switch could turn on a low-wattage LED strip in one Alwyn room, powered by a deep cycle battery, for use only in emergencies or when we needed light for medical tasks. Riley examined Emma's leg more thoroughly over the next 2 days. She cleaned the skin, checked for deformity, and decided it was likely a closed fracture near the ankle. "If this were before," she said quietly to me while Emma slept, "I would send her straight to an emergency department for imaging and proper casting. Here, we have to keep her off it, keep swelling down, and hope it heals well enough." We alternated between hope and vigilance. We watched Emma carefully for any sign of infection. We also watched the forest for a new kind of danger. More people on the road meant more attention. Any stranger who saw Jason's SUV near the station would note it. The confrontation we had feared finally came on a cold, clear morning about 6 weeks after I first arrived. It began with the sound of multiple engines. Not one truck this time, but 3, approaching from the west. Riley was in the attic when she hissed my name. I joined her and counted 2 pickup trucks and 1 older SUV moving in convoy. They stopped 100 yards away instead of pulling into the yard. Men and women climbed out, at least 7 people in total, all armed in some way. One had a scoped rifle, another had a shotgun with a taped stock. I saw machetes, bats, and 1 pistol tucked into a waistband. They talked together for a moment. Then 2 of them started toward the station on foot while the others spread out along the tree line. "This is not a casual visit," I said quietly. "No," Riley agreed. "We have high ground and a solid door. That's the only reason I am not telling you we need to run." Jason was in the main room, checking canned food inventory. I called down to him. "Take Emma into the garage," I said. "Stay there and keep silent. If they get inside, there's a back door from the garage to the woods. You take her and go." He nodded, eyes wide, and moved fast. The pair approaching the station did not carry their weapons openly. They let them hang but kept their hands near the grips. When they were about 20 yards away, the taller one, a man with a trimmed beard and a leather jacket, called out. "Hello in the station," he said, voice loud and smooth. "We can see your truck, and we can see you've been busy. We're not here to cause trouble. We're here to talk." I glanced at Riley. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think they're practiced at this," she said. "They stop short, show they've scouted, try to sound reasonable. Do you want to answer?" "Yes," I said, from behind the door. I climbed down, took a position to the side of the steel door with the shotgun ready, and raised my voice. "Talking is fine from where you are," I called. "No one comes closer to the porch. State your business and keep your hands away from your weapons." The man laughed lightly. "Fair enough," he said. "My name is Mark. We have a small group set up about 10 miles west of here, near a gravel pit. We saw your smoke from a distance a few days ago. You're clearly organized. We thought you might be interested in trading or joining forces. There is safety in numbers." Safety in numbers sounded good on paper, but the way they had approached did not feel like an invitation. It felt like pressure. I kept my tone even. "We're managing here," I said. "We appreciate the offer, but we're not looking to move." Mark tilted his head. "Managing for now," he said. "But what happens when your generator fails, or when a larger group finds you, or when your food runs low? We keep watch over this whole sector. We can provide extra fuel, medicine, manpower." I thought about the vehicles, the weapons, the way his people had already pushed into the trees to flank us. "If you're here to trade," I said, "tell your friends to step back into the open where I can see them. Otherwise, this conversation is over." There was a long pause. Then Mark sighed. "You're cautious," he said. "That is smart, I'll be honest. We cannot leave a fortified position like this unsecured nearby. It's too much of a risk. Someone less friendly than us might move in. So we need to reach some kind of arrangement." My grip tightened on the shotgun. "An arrangement where you control this place," I said. He spread his hands. "Or where we share it," he said. "But yes, we need a stake. That can be fuel, food, weapons, or space. I would rather not argue about it with gunshots." Riley whispered from above through the crack of the attic hatch. "They're preparing to test us," she said. "We have to show that this is not worth the cost." I raised my voice slightly. "Here is my counteroffer," I said. "You turn your vehicles around and leave. You do not come within a mile of this station again. If you do, we will treat you as hostile. We will not shoot first today, but if you take one more step toward this porch, I will fire." There was another pause. Then Mark's tone hardened. "That would be a mistake," he said quietly. He took a single step forward. I fired a warning shot into the ground 6 feet in front of him, angled down so the pellets tore into dirt and not flesh. The blast echoed off the trees. He stumbled back, hands flying up instinctively. His people along the tree line snapped into motion, raising weapons and shouting, but none of them fired immediately. I racked another round, loud enough that they could hear it. "Next shots will not be warnings," I said. "Your choice." The standoff lasted long enough for my arms to start to shake under the tension. Finally, Mark signaled with one hand. His people slowly lowered their weapons. "This is not finished," he called. "We will remember you turned down help." "You showed up with guns and demands," I said. "That is not help." They backed away, returned to their vehicles, and eventually drove off, engines revving louder than necessary, as if they wanted to leave a mark with noise, if not with bullets. We watched them from the attic until they were gone. For the next week, we did not relax. We set additional tripwires deeper in the woods, extended our observation positions by building small, concealed platforms in trees, and changed our routines. No fires outside, no unnecessary lights, no vehicle movement unless vital. We also planned for the worst-case scenario, a full assault on the station. Our plan centered on a fallback route. About half a mile north, there was an old line cabin used by fire crews during extended operations. It had a stone foundation, a small loft, and a wood stove. It lacked the steel door and concrete walls of the station, but it was hidden in a gully with dense trees around it. Over several days, we quietly moved part of our supplies there. Some canned food, medical kits, spare clothing, and a small water filter. We did it in small batches at different times, using separate paths to avoid leaving a single obvious trail. The attack, when it came, did not involve shouting or demands. It came with fire. It was a dry, windy night at the tail end of summer. The air smelled of dust and dry needles. In the attic crawlspace, I could feel the faint vibration of wind against the metal roof. I was on the first watch while Riley slept, Emma and Jason sharing the main room below. The forest sounded strangely empty. Then, faint at first, I heard the crackle. Wildfire is a distinct sound when you have spent years near it. It is not just the snap of burning branches. It is a continuous background roar overlaid with sharp pops. I peered through the observation slit and saw an orange glow low on the horizon to the west. It did not look like a small campfire. It looked like a line. "Riley," I called quietly. "Wake up, now." She joined me in seconds, still pulling on her jacket. Together, we watched as the glow grew brighter. The wind pushed the smell of smoke toward us. There was no lightning, no recent storms. This fire was not natural. "Mark," she said, "or his people, they want to drive us out." Setting a fire in conditions like this was reckless even for them. There was no guarantee the flames would stop at the station. They might burn their own camp if the wind shifted, but if they thought they could flush us or force us to flee in panic, they might consider it worth the risk. "We have maybe an hour," I said, guessing based on the distance and wind. "Maybe less if there are crowning runs." We made decisions fast. Jason carried Emma to the truck while I grabbed the packs we kept ready by the door. Each one had a small share of food, water, ammunition, and essential tools. Riley pulled a folded topographic map from the desk and tucked it into her jacket. "We cannot drive west," she said. "We drive east or north, but if the fire crosses the road, we are trapped in the truck." "We go north on foot and head for the line cabin," I said. "Truck stays here. If they fire on the building once they see we're leaving, we do not want to be pinned in the open." We moved fast but not frantically. Panic leads to mistakes. I had seen that in evacuation drills before the world fell apart. Now, the stakes were even higher. We strapped Emma into a frame backpack we had modified earlier for carrying supplies, padding the inside with blankets and securing her splinted leg. Jason took that load since she was his daughter, and he insisted, even though his arms shook with effort. I carried the shotgun and a small duffel of extra shells. Riley took the pistol, the bows, and a coil of paracord. Before we left, I paused at the steel door and looked back at the main room. The barricaded windows, the pump, the maps on the wall marked with pencil lines and notes. This station had kept us alive for weeks. Now it was about to become a test of whether we could adapt again. We slipped out the back, using the garage door and then cutting into the trees. The fire's glow reflected off the radio tower. Embers were starting to drift through the air like faint red dots. I kept my eyes on the ground and the faint game trail we had marked earlier. Behind us, the station stood silent. We had gone less than 200 yards when gunshots cracked behind us. Not aimed in our direction, but into the air and into the station. I could picture Mark's group shooting at the building, venting frustration, maybe trying to finish the job by punching holes that would let embers in. The steel door would hold. The boarded windows might not. We did not turn back. The forest ahead was dark, but we knew the route. We listened for infected drawn by the fire or the shots, but for now, the dominant sound was the growing roar of flames. In a strange twist, the coming fire gave us a form of cover. Anyone chasing us would have to risk getting too close to it. We reached the line cabin in less than 40 minutes, guided by memory and the faint outline of the gully in our headlamps. Once inside, we secured the door with a wooden bar, covered the single window with a blanket to hide our light, and sat down on the floor to catch our breath. Emma leaned against her father's chest, eyes wide. "Is the station gone?" she asked quietly. "Not yet," I said. "Maybe not at all. Concrete does better in fires than wood. We will check in the morning when the fire line passes, if it is safe." We barely slept. We took turns listening at the door and window, ears tuned for approaching footsteps under the crackle of distant flames. Infected could still move through burned areas once the fire front passed, and so could people. But the night passed with only the background roar. At dawn, the wind died down. The smoke settled into the valley, a gray haze that stung our eyes. We ate a quick meal of crackers and peanut butter, drank sparingly from our water bottles, and left Emma and Jason in the cabin while Riley and I scouted. We moved south, staying below ridge lines where the smoke was slightly thinner. When we reached a vantage point, we saw the extent of the fire. It had burned in a rough line from the west past the station site and into the trees beyond. The radio tower still stood, blackened but upright. The concrete block main building was still in place. The garage's roof had partially collapsed, but the walls remained. We approached cautiously, scanning for movement. There were footprints near the station, but they were hard to read in the ash. No fresh tire tracks, suggesting Mark's group had left once the fire took hold. The steel door was scorched and blackened, but still solid. The plywood over the windows was gone, consumed by flame, leaving the aluminum frames warped. Inside, the air was hot and smelled of burnt wood and plastic. The ceiling in one corner had dark scorch marks, but the structure was intact. The cabinets were charred at the edges, but most contents survived. Our cots had burned along with some miscellaneous gear, but the pump still worked. When I tried it, water poured out after a few hard strokes, discolored at first, but quickly clearing. "We got lucky," Riley said. "If the fire had crowned in the canopy directly over us, it would have been worse." "Luck helped," I said. "So did concrete." The station was no longer the hidden fortress it had been. The burned trees around it opened sight lines from farther away. Anyone on the ridges could now see the radio tower clearly. But we still had water, walls, and a location we understood. At the same time, we now had proof that human groups nearby were willing to use fire as a weapon. That was not something we could ignore. When we returned to the line cabin to collect Jason and Emma, we laid out our options plainly. We could abandon this part of the forest entirely, load what we could into the truck, and try our luck on new roads. Or we could rebuild smarter, using the station as one point in a small network instead of our only shelter. "We know this country," Jason said. "We know where the bad group is, roughly. Out there, we know nothing. I vote we stay, but we do not bet everything on one building." Emma nodded, holding her father's hand. "I like the station," she said, "but I like this cabin too. Maybe we can have both." In the end, that was what we did. Over the next days, we divided our time between repairing the station and making the line cabin more comfortable. We moved some supplies back, but left enough hidden at the cabin to survive if we had to retreat there suddenly. We built a small cache farther away with sealed containers of rice, water purification tablets, and a basic first aid kit. We extended our tripwire system and hung new metal and bells. We used the burned areas to our advantage, setting up clear fields of view for observing movement. I spent more time than before up in the attic crawl space of the station, looking out over the altered landscape. The once dense forest now had scars and gaps. The dirt road was more exposed, but I also saw things I had not noticed before. A small creek glinting in the distance to the north, a rock outcrop to the east that could serve as an excellent lookout, and the faint trace of an old skid trail that could provide a silent path between the station and the cabin. The outbreak had taken the old world away and replaced it with something harsher. But the basic rules of survival had not changed. Know your terrain, control your resources, limit your exposure, prepare for more than one failure. The ranger station, once a forgotten dot on a map, had become the center of our own small system. The infected still wandered through the area. Sometimes we watched them move through the burned trees, stepping over fallen logs and ash. Sometimes we heard distant shouts or engines from human groups we tried to avoid. But inside our network of wire, traps, and hidden paths, we moved with purpose. I no longer saw the station as a fortress that would hold forever. I saw it as one more tool in a set. The walls, the steel door, the pump, the attic vantage point. They had all kept us alive through the first phase. Reinforcing it had bought us time to think and adapt. Now we used that time to build something wider than one building. Every night, when I took my turn in the attic, I would scan the burned horizon and listen to the changed forest. The world outside remained dangerous and unstable, but inside our little carved-out space between the station and the line cabin, we had something that mattered more than walls. We had a plan, we had each other, and we had the will to adjust to every new threat instead of waiting for rescue that would not come. In a world where many people chose the highways and crowded shelters, we had chosen a dead-end dirt road, a concrete box, and a hidden cabin in the trees. It was not safe in any absolute sense, but on each quiet morning when we checked the tripwires, pumped clear water, and heard no engines on the road, it felt stable enough for one more day. In a landscape filled with noise and chaos, that was a kind of victory we could live with. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.